Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast, a conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Hey, Ephrata Community Church, it's great to have you joining us once again for our weekly podcast where we take time to unpack what God did at the services this past weekend. Jim, in case you forgot, you preached the message this past weekend. And, over the next couple minutes ahead, I'd love to hear, thoughts. Of course, we'll dive into some of these particular details, but on an overall, catching the entire thing as you look back on three services, everything from how you prepared for the weekend, pre-service prayer, all the way through ministry time and you driving home, and it's all in the rear
We're going
view.
to pull back the curtain.
Yeah, so
First
like,
of all, pull it way back. Let's go back
Okay.
to God Is, because I think I was number 7.
As a series.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I was 7, and there's one more coming Kevin's going to do after our upcoming marriage conference weekend. There's going to be one more week where Kevin just kind of pulls it together. But man, wasn't the God Is series amazing? We've heard so much from people saying, like, first of all, I think just the front of house people or the pastors sharing from their own stories. Man, it reminds us everyone can relate to those stories in their own way, right?
Sure.
So even the feedback I got from yesterday was like, oh my word, I had a similar journey around coming out of the holiness stream and how the Lord brought me out, but yet still respect it. And others coming to me going, hey, help pray for me because I'm carrying some bitterness towards my previous stream. Just people can relate to our stories and then to the God who met us in our stories. So I've just loved the fact that I feel like I know all my colleagues better who shared. And also I got a glimpse into why Dan Golnick loves the Lord the way he does, the way you love the Lord the way you do. While Kevin loves the Lord.
Yeah.
It felt like I was left into the intimate side.
Yeah.
And for me, it'd be, Lord, all my life you have been faithful. There's a reason we picked that song at the end. Like if I would have been told what my life would have been like, I would have probably ran away from it. But the way the Lord just kept bringing what I needed in to become more like him, it's just right on. Anyway, I loved it, but more about why I picked what I picked, I can in a second, but I'll pause there.
No, let's go right into it. So that's the entire series as a whole.
Yeah.
And you had the opportunity to share. You chose what you chose. Why did you choose what you chose? Give us for anybody listening who may not have heard it, kind of a real brief overview of what it was. And then, what it was. This is the way I put language to it. As I go into a weekend where I'm communicating, I'm carrying, I visualize, not that I try to, it just happens. I visualize here's how I see it impacting people. Here's how I can see post-service ministry time going. Like I picture all of it. So
well, first of all, I was considering, and for many weeks it was on our speaking schedule, was me speaking on God is my deliverer. But then I realized as I was working on it that I began to focus more on how he delivered me, right? Like he empowered me in certain new things in my life, and all of a sudden I realized it delivered me for something that I didn't even know was going on. So in my story, I wanted to hit on the fact that I never fully realized that living almost exclusively in the holiness stream of the church with its benefits, but also its blind spots. I didn't know my blind spots. You don't know your blind spots, right?
Exactly.
You almost need to be delivered from them. And then you have to study how he delivers you. He delivered me by leading me into other things that when I began to be empowered in those things, all of a sudden I was able to look back and go, I see what you brought me from. Like,
when you say other things, you mean other streams?
Yeah, for me it was another stream. It was the charismatic stream and some of the gifts it carries that spoke to why I felt like I was to be a carrier of authority in the world, but my stream had nothing to offer me in that. And it's not just because of Jim's personality or bigness. I literally would be reading the Bible and going, there's more here. Like we have to be more than just a good reason to believe in God or a set of principles, all of which are gorgeous, right? That the holiness stream will offer. But I was like, man, Jim at his best, even if I'm communicating my best, delivering my gifts at the best, it's not enough to see the number of people encounter Jesus that need to encounter him or to break through what they need to see. I need the Holy Spirit. I was like thinking that without even having words for it. Like there's gotta be an empowerment on my life. And like I even allude to, I think in one of the service, I would read Acts 1 where Jesus says, don't leave Jerusalem. When I was younger, I read it like, good for the disciples. They got a special gift, right? And then as I began to read my Bible more and more, and I saw he sent out the 72, not just the 12. Then he sent out 120 plus. Then he falls at Pentecost, and I'm like, oh, this is for all of us. So anyway, I started with God as deliverer. he's delivered me through empowering me for my kingdom purposes. And that's always been linked to my devotional life. I don't think everyone's kingdom purposes always feed back to their individual devotional life the way maybe mine does. But oh man, it's been a great trip with God ever since.
Yeah.
Now granted, you heard my funny story, and there's the other thing. I had a serious story I could have told that got to the same place. I chose going for a little bit more humor on this one. Just then my backstory of going off the YWAM and how just dramatically different than anything I'd ever seen before, and how it hit me.
What was your friend's name again?
John Laux.
John
man.
Laux, that's right.
He's now like like in my life, like if I'm getting John Lauxed by something, it's God's making me uncomfortable in order to encounter more of him. I'm like, I'm getting Lauxed here.
Yeah, that's awesome. You shared, man, I wanted to interrupt you, but then I realized I'm respectful, so I chose not to. But now I'm forgetting what I wanted to say. It was a comment you were making about the streams, so there's two ways to see it, and I'm bringing this up because one, this is illuminating to me right now, and so I'm genuinely curious, but also for those in which the idea of the streams of the church is new, and I never heard of it until you and I started relating with each other here on the team, and it's still very new. But anyway, you mentioned the discontentment a person can have within their church context. There's got to be more, right? That statement as a capturing a sentiment or a feeling.
Sacred discontent.
Right.
Where it's a form of discontent that's being brought on by the Lord because he has more. Right.
And maybe a person without understanding of streams might then think there's something wrong with this church. And you're saying, no, there actually might be a stream that's actually embedded within you, part of your spiritual DNA, that is longing for a different display of who God is in the world.
You nailed
it. And it's not so much of the deficiency of that particular church as much as it's the way God shows up in different streams that you're actually longing to see or experience a different stream of who God is. Is that
exactly? Okay. And I love the fact you used the word deficiency, because deficiencies are a part of life. Sin shouldn't be, or trauma or toxicity. Those are different, right? So of course we always have our extreme things of how the justice stream might become so focused just on human experience and lose track of who God is, or the holiness stream can slip into the hands of control people. But I will say this, I'm a person that believes that the Christian life is not a balanced state where you figure out the two streams that most inform you and find a perfect balance.
Sure.
Balance is a static state. It's heat death. If the universe ever balanced out, you'd have a black hole. It's where there's no highs and lows. I do believe the Christian life is these like oftentimes two poles of a magnet that are both pulling on us and keeping us healthy. So for Jim Ehrman's life right now, the evangelical charismatic poles within the church, they keep me healthy. And sometimes it was like, Jim, I need to pull the evangelical out and substitute the contemplative in for a little bit, because you're losing track of your belovedness. Yeah. You lose track of your belovedness to me.
Yeah.
And so I've had whole seasons in my experience where even my devotional readings for that year would come out of the books that are written in the contemplative stream, which have a very different feel than evangelical stream devotional books, which oftentimes have this recharge your batteries for the missional life of the kingdom expanding in your world. And so I just want to say that I believe once you start to wrap your head around the fact that these 6 streams, all of which are really just 6 ways that the Spirit moved through Jesus, and we could map them. By the way, I think in the first service we actually read Mark 1, where you see in those
Matthew
5 little... I said Matthew 1, but it is Mark 1.
Oh, is that? Oh.
Yeah, that's why the slides got thrown off on Saturday night.
This is why Kevin wants us to bring our own Bibles.
Mark. That's right. I was like, Kevin's so proud I'm going to read from a Bible. But anyway, in Mark 1, 35 through 39, you see all 6 of the streams showing up. Jesus goes to a solitary place. Yeah. Peter comes and says, let's keep preaching here because there's an evangelistic revival breaking out. And Jesus is like, how about we go to the next town? And that's when justice people are like, always go to the marginal. Like all the streams are in the way Jesus handles that moment. Now, you and I can't be all 6. However, we can be a part of a people that respect the 6 and draw from them in seasons.
Yeah, see the value of them,
now,
the necessity of them.
That doesn't mean that we will never be a charismatic evangelical church primarily here.
Right.
But man, there's moments where we got to dip into some of the others. Like just even what we did in the justice area of raising money to relieve medical debt. Right. There's some people where that is life to them right now. Yeah. There's 30,000 people that are about to have their medical debt erased.
Right.
That's life, man.
Yeah,
that's pushing back on systems that have misaligned in people's lives, and they need some form of justice and help in that area. man, it's so good for his church like ours to engage in that every once in a while and see what that kind of freedom brings people.
Yeah, you're also drawing people who are oriented towards a justice stream or whatever that stream is to say, oh, finally something I can get behind and get excited about. Because we'll bring in other speakers to believe for God to heal the sick right now, and they might be going, that's all well and good. But then you say, hey, we're going to give to this initiative.
It's a very practical need, right?
And they're like, let's go.
And you saw it, man, $309,000. We saw $30 million of debt erased for roughly 30,000 people.
Yeah.
Come on.
That's pretty amazing.
Stuff.
I want to pivot to the authority piece. Here.
There were two movements.
Before I get there,
please.
Sorry. Resourcing there, specifically on the streams, right? Before we move off the streams, if people are wanting to learn more about it, there's
2 ways to do it.
Yeah, go ahead.
One, the book by Richard Foster, Streams of Living Water, The 6 Great Traditions of the Church. Can't recommend it enough. Matter of fact, in all of my readings in all of my life, that book has never slipped out of the top 3 on my personal, that I'll revisit it every 2 years or so, or secondly, I recommend it. So Streams of Living Water, The Great Traditions of the Church by Richard Foster. Now, secondly to that is, we're going to, in this week's e-news, put a link to 6 hours of teaching that I did in the HarvestNet School of Ministry, 1 hour on each of the streams, sharing the beauties, what historical figures were represented within that stream, the holiness stream with John Wesley, or the contemplative stream with Henry Nouwen or something. I'm just going to go through. And then I recommend in those teachings, hey, if you're interested in exploring this further, here's some of the elementary readings I'd first started in this area. So that's going to be made available via a link in this week's e-news. And so enjoy those for those of you who this started to bring some understanding. Sometimes categories help us understand where we're at and even lead us into better ways to forgive or process the future. And I hope that serves some of you.
Yeah, and if you don't get our e-news, you can just email connect@effort@community.church to either get the e-news.
Remember, I screwed that up. It's info.
It's connect@effort@community.church or info or ask or Jim at effort@community.church or whatever you choose to email.
Yeah, Jim at effort@communitychurch.com will get this to you as well.
Regardless, you can either say, hey, I'd like to get the e-news, or can you send me those teachings? Because this is very, really illuminating for a lot of people.
And I think it's life-giving too.
It is, for sure.
It does.
So you would have ended your message then. Of course, you started with how God opened up your eyes to see the charismatic stream, brought freedom. But then you kind of
I transitioned into one of the great messages of the charismatic stream. So if you, I'm not sure if you had a chance to see it. I hope you did. I decided to talk about my journey of how the Lord used the charismatic stream to do so much in my life. Never, never, ever completely altering the holiness and evangelical upbringing, but really adding this on. And then I thought, well, why don't I end on one of the great themes of that stream, which is empowerment. I mean, the charismatic stream will remind you that we have been given authority. We're not merely been given a spirit of comfort that gets us through this world unto that day when everything comes together. Is that no, the charismatic stream will always remind you the kingdom is in your midst. The way Jesus looked at that 12 and that 72, and he said a couple common things to him: don't take bags, etc., but this, and tell them that the kingdom of God is near them, right? That's the charismatic stream's great thing. And therefore, without getting hyper-spiritual and labeling everything as the devil or something God may or may not be doing and through that thing, we are sensitive, however, to the spiritual dynamics that work in the world, that if we can pull back the curtain a little bit. And then therefore, that's why I bring Renner up, because for 5.5 weeks after the sleep exhaustion trying to break through, I'm sitting there thinking, hey, I am up against the natural realm reality of sleep regression. And all of a sudden, I started to got shown different characteristics of it. It's like, hold a second, it looks like the enemy's jumped on board with some natural things that go on in this world and is amplifying the negative aspects of them.
Right.
And that needs to get dealt with in Jesus. And sure enough, man, so all of a sudden, that's where I introduced, at some point, I went from petitionary prayer, Lord, would you be with us in this, etc., to all of a sudden, because some other members of my community confirmed it. There's another thing I wish I would have had more time to talk about. When do I know I can move from petitionary prayer or agreeing prayer into commanding prayer? I had a couple people I really care about look at me and go, Jim, there's something going on here that you need to maybe go after. And sure enough, when I did, what Rachel and I saw happen was just utterly unexplainable and a breakthrough. So anyway, so I did, you're right, I picked up on some classic authority themes that I've learned through what Jesus has shown me about.
Did you have anybody, what was the follow-up response to that? People saying, oh my word,
it's funny.
My scenario was, and this helps me. Like, how was the response
50-50. Would you believe? I told Kevin Sunday morning, Saturday night after the service, I probably had about 8 people come up to me and say something. Half of them were, Jim, your story of how the Lord honored the holiness stream, but yet led you into other understandings resonates with me. And the other half resonated with, I feel like there's areas I've forgotten I have authority in, and this reminded me to change my posture. So it was 50-50, the response to those two parts of the message.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it could have happened similarly on Sunday. I just kind of stopped keeping track, but I noticed.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be lost on us, like just the dynamic of the different ways in which you pray, or what prayer can even look like, whether you're petitioning God or you're commanding prayer.
Or
like,
agreeing with God around something, right?
Like there's different, like this is, I imagine for a number of people, blowing their minds just outright, just on the conversation about what prayer can look like is all new.
Yeah, and truthfully, first of all, let's all first say, Lord, come and blow my mind.
Yeah.
I want a life that's leveled up. Because that's what you're admitting when you realize there's a leveled up place for spiritual growth or for authority. You're admitting, Lord, show me that which is going to make me uncomfortable, because it's a part of a world that I'm not living in right now. So yeah, I do think minds are always blown. But in particular, when you start to see this, another thing you're going to deal with is just how much authority you have been given. At one level, we all want to live like that son who returned as a prodigal and said, just let me live in the barn. I'm just happy that you're willing to have me back. Yeah. And the father says, no, how about we put rings of authority and robes of dignity, meaning you carry the family name back on you. And we all know that it feels like way too soon, just like I'm sure those disciples
imposter
in the 72.
syndrome, perhaps.
Yeah, it's an imposter syndrome or shame. I think the enemy's biggest is shame, and then false humility in this region. We just have this thing where we're just afraid to sit around and talk about what gifts we carry or what we're to do with it and stuff like that. So I will push back on a spirit of false humility as well on this, and just remind you, may your mind be blown with the fact that you're sons and daughters of a living God whose kingdom is advancing now, right?
Yeah. A big part of our discipling around here is encouraging people always, like, what's your next step? You know, growth is normal for those who are always taking one step at a time, and God leads us in a journey, and it's one step at a time. So what are some next steps you would encourage people to consider in light of the authority conversation, or in light of the, prayer itself is just like, just the landscape of what prayer can be, all of a sudden is opened up to me in a new way. What do I do now?
Yeah, well, first I always say this, that I say yes, Lord, and I mean that with all sincerity. One of the things that this stream has taught me, that when I'm seeing a new thing, it's just not mine to go figure out. The Holiness Stream taught me, go figure it out, understand the principles, work the principles almost transactionally. If anything, I don't want to make it sound like it's just streams. What the Lord did in me taught, like when He's first bringing me a new insight, He's a good Father. And sometimes it's just like, bring it, Daddy. Come on. Like, bring on that revelation. And I compare it to Samuel in the temple when the Lord's whispering to him at night in his sleep. And he thinks it's Eli the priest, and he goes, hey, what do you want? And Eli's 3 times, Eli was like, hey, it wasn't me. Go back. Remember the 3rd time Eli says this, go back and say this the next time you hear the voice. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And that's always my first thing. If you even got stirred in your being this weekend, or even as this podcast's going on, man, remember He's a good, good Father that wants to lead you into these things. Just sit and say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Because that's what happened to me in my story when I'm sitting there at Last Days Ministries freaked out. I had nothing to be able to go on. This was so different, except I sensed God was in it. Matter of fact, I would say this, all I had was the fragrance of God in that moment. I did not understand the ways. I did not understand the comfort level. I did not understand. It wasn't even familiar. And I just simply said, speak, your servant's listening. I'm yours. And man, I'm telling you, He, I think, sits and goes, you better believe I'll keep talking. Right?
Yeah. Quick question, quiz. What stream of the church would that passage or that sentiment, speak, Lord, your servant is listening? Is that contemplative, or where would that land?
Yeah, I
was curious.
I would think that there's 2 streams of the church in particular. The sacramental stream, which believes in such mystery, it doesn't always try to figure everything out. Right? The sacramental stream and the liturgical stream, full of mystery, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the contemplative
it.
stream that so delves into the belovedness of God, they don't even have to worry about figuring things out. They know they have a good Father that's going to take care of them.
I feel like I'm a contemplative.
Dude, you are. You are. Like, I literally sometimes look at you and I'm like, he is a displaced contemplative among the charismatic stream. But by the way, again, I think guys like you and I, we have a lead and a second. I always say this, a minor and a major.
Yeah.
But all that to say, the contemplative stream has the ability to not try to do something as soon as it gets a revelation, to sit in it a little bit longer. And bless it, thank God that some of those disciplines get into our stream no matter what. The Spirit's conform, all of those streams point to one city whose maker and builder God. In this case, one person, Jesus, who we're being conformed into. Right. So you pick up on some of these themes even if you never get the privilege of the labels, right? Yeah. So there's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is take a step towards your community. If there's one common thing you would have been hearing in my story, it was me being vulnerable to a people, even in the midst of it all, right? And there's another thing, even at that moment, it was YWAM, right? And truthfully, carrying the fact that I was confused leaving my holiness stream covering for a season, but yet honoring it. I just say this, say yes to community, stick close to people. I think someone like Jim Lusby, whose story I called out because I just so loved that Jim has enough trauma in his background, he'd never have to get near another person in his life and be able to justify it. Instead, he stood in authority, he said, I will not spend all my days as a loner, and I will be a part of a people. And he goes out to breakfast and then prays with someone at the end. Dude, the spiritual authority he showed in that moment will forever change his trajectory and the trajectory of that family. And so I oftentimes say this, in moments where you say, Lord, speak, Lord, your servant's listening, then turn to a community that has the fragrance of what you feel like the Lord's doing in your life. And whether you're here at ECC long-term or not, hang out with us for a bit if we're part of that in this season. And I tell you, it will be good things for your soul, man.
It's so good. Jim, thanks for bringing the message, man.
My pleasure, dude. You can tell I care about it. I care about all of you. You're great.
Yeah, it was fun.
What's coming up?
Yeah, we have the
marriage. Desmond and Sandy Frey. Frey. You got to do it the German way. Excuse me, the Swiss German way. But yeah, they will be here this weekend. We're having our marriage conference. If you signed up for it, great. We hope you're there. If not, come on out for the services anyway. But Desmond and Sandy will be stewarding us in that time. It'll be good. They're great.
It'll be a great weekend. Thank you so much for being here today. We hope you are having a great rest of your week, and we look forward to being with you this weekend as well as on the podcast next week.
Yep.
Till then, God bless.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us at EphphathaCommunityChurch.com.